Okay, so like what if, right? What if we hopped in a time machine, went to 2025, and boom, Donald Trump is back in the White House for round two?
A second term, huh? That's
Yeah,
a big what if.
it is. And today we're diving deep into that, not to get political or anything, but just to think about the economics of it all.
Right, the potential ripple effects on the economy, the good, the bad, the whole shebang.
Exactly. And we're basing this whole deep dive on this really interesting document that lays out a hypothetical podcast episode on this very topic.
Oh, so we're like podcasting about a podcast. That's meta.
Kinda, yeah. But this document, it's like our treasure map. It's got all these juicy details and suggestions on how to explore the economic landscape of a second Trump term.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's get into it.
All right, buckle up. This document says we should start with taxes, specifically the possibility of Trump pushing for something like the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act he signed back in 2017.
Ah, the TCJA. That definitely stirred things up back then.
Big time. So, for those who need a refresher, what was the deal with those tax cuts? Did they actually deliver on their promises?
Well, the main gist was slashing corporate tax rates and lowering individual income tax rates for many folks.
Sounds good on paper, right? Less taxes, more money in everyone's pockets.
That was the idea, the whole trickle-down theory, boost the economy from the top, and the benefits will eventually reach everyone.
But wasn't there a lot of pushback? Didn't people say it mostly benefited the wealthy and left the average Joe out in the cold?
There was definitely a ton of debate. Critics argued that the benefits were skewed towards corporations and higher earners, potentially contributing to the income gap.
And what about the other side of the coin? What did the folks who supported the tax cuts have to say?
They'd argue that any economic growth is good growth and that everyone benefits eventually. It's a complex issue, for sure.
It is. And if Trump were to push for similar tax reforms again, you can bet that debate would fire right back up. This document specifically mentions the potential impact on small businesses.
Yeah, and that's where things get even trickier.
How so?
Well, you can't lump all small businesses together, right? Some, especially those structured in a certain way, did benefit from those corporate tax cuts back in 2017. Others, particularly the really small operations, they might not have seen much of a difference or even found the changes more complicated than helpful.
Right. Every business is different. So we're talking potential winners and losers, depending on the specifics of the reforms.
Exactly. And keep in mind, the economic landscape has changed a lot since those first tax cuts. We've had a pandemic, supply chain issues. It's a whole new ballgame.
Totally. Okay, so let's move on to another area where Trump really made waves: trade.
Ah, yes, trade. Always a hot topic. This document points out that trade policy was a defining issue in Trump's first term, and could be again if he gets a second.
For sure. We're talking trade wars, tariffs, those renegotiated trade deals. It felt like there was a new headline every week.
It was a whirlwind. Trump's approach was all about putting America first, often through protectionist policies.
Okay, break it down for us. What exactly does that mean for everyday folks? Like, how did those policies affect what we buy and how much we pay for things?
Think back to those tariffs on goods from China, especially on things like steel and aluminum. The goal was to shield American industries from foreign competition, right?
Right, but didn't that also make things more expensive for consumers? Like, didn't the price of washing machines and even beer go up?
You got it. That's the catch with protectionism. It might help certain industries here, but it can also hit consumers in the wallet. And remember, those tariffs on Chinese goods led to retaliatory tariffs from China.
It's like a domino effect. One thing leads to another, and everyone feels it.
Exactly. And those retaliatory tariffs, they really hurt American farmers who export crops to China.
Speaking of farmers, this document specifically calls out manufacturing and agriculture as sectors that could be heavily impacted by Trump's trade policies. Let's dig a little deeper. What might the future hold for these industries if we rewind back to a Trump presidency?
Okay, so for manufacturing, we could see a continued push for policies designed to boost domestic production.
Like what kind of policies?
Think tax breaks, less regulation, things that make it more appealing for companies to manufacture goods here in the U.S. The idea is to bring back jobs and revitalize the sector.
Makes sense. But didn't we just talk about how tariffs can backfire? Wouldn't that create problems for manufacturers too?
It's a tightrope walk. While those policies might offer some benefits, you also have to weigh the risks of ongoing trade tensions.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, think about disruptions to global supply chains. If we're relying more on domestic production, but those supply chains get messed up, it could create bottlenecks and shortages.
Right, and wouldn't those trade tensions also make it harder for American manufacturers to sell their goods overseas?
Exactly. So it's a mixed bag, potential gains for American manufacturing, but with some serious challenges to navigate.
Okay, I'm starting to see how complicated this all is. So, what about agriculture? We talked about how farmers were hit hard by those retaliatory tariffs last time. What might a second Trump term mean for them?
Agriculture is definitely a sector where we could see a continuation of Trump's previous policies, more emphasis on protecting American farmers, but also more of the same uncertainties that come with a global market thrown off balance by trade disputes.
So, more of a mixed bag.
Pretty much. There's the possibility of more subsidies to help farmers cope with losses from those retaliatory tariffs, but whether that's a long-term solution is debatable.
So it sounds like the potential economic impacts of a second Trump term, especially when it comes to trade, are anything but straightforward.
You said it. It's a complex web of potential positives and negatives, and a lot depends on the specifics of the policies and how the global economy reacts.
Right, and we can't forget that this is all hypothetical. There are tons of factors we can't predict.
Absolutely. The global economic climate, unforeseen events, you name it, things could change drastically.
So much to think about. We've covered a lot. But one thing's for sure, the economic future under a potential second Trump term is full of twists and turns. Out of everything we've discussed, what do you think is the most important thing for people to watch?
Honestly, I think trade policy is the big one. It has the power to make or break things for so many sectors, from manufacturing to agriculture, and ultimately for consumers like you and me.
It's like we're trying to read tea leaves here, trying to make sense of a future that's still being written. And that brings me to a final question for you, dear listener. Imagine you're sitting across from President Trump in the Oval Office, giving him advice. What economic policy would you tell him to focus on? And why? Think about that as you go about your day. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.